Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another thing where I talk about things. Today we're going to talk about the video game Tyranny. I recently picked that up as a recommendation. Copy who works with this said that it was a fun game and it was on it was on sale at the time, and I would say starting off before I talk about the game, if you pick it up on the sale price, I would recommend it. I think it's a good game for that price. I don't know if I'd recommend it at full price. In my opinion, it felt like it was a little bit short for what it was. But this may be because I thought that I was on the clock and I rushed through things a little bit. The reason is because there's like a every time you go somewhere in the game, you're like, go to this location. It warns you like, oh, it'll take 3 days to go here. It'll take 2 days to go here. And it's really not relevant. I mean, like, there are some things that are a factor of time. Like, you know, you kind of like going here and going there will cause certain things. Like, if you write a letter, it's like, oh, it'll take an hour. It'll take 24 hours for you to receive a response from this person. So, you know, as you bounce around, you get letters from people, or like things that you were working on in some other location get finished. But there's really not very much to the whole time element, and I mistakenly believed there was. I was concerned, like, you know, you include a time element like that, and every time you go somewhere, it warned you about how many days it's going to take you. I thought for sure, like, oh, if I screw around too long, I'm going to lose out on some opportunities. But by the end of the game, there was a quest that somebody sent me on. They were like, yeah, we've pinned down this criminal. We want you to go and, like, round him up before he escapes. And so, like, I don't know how long it had been, because I've been bouncing all over the world solving these quests at, like, I don't know, maybe, like, over a month later. They still had the guy pinned down. And not even, like, somewhere, like, he wasn't, like, entrenched somewhere just, like, waiting it out. It was just sort of like he was out in the streets, and, like, the guards were just, like, talking to him, and they were like, give yourself up, Steve the criminal. And he's like, never. And then he runs inside his house, and or inside someone's house. And so, like, yeah, you know, like, there was no point to having the timer, really. It's not that big of a deal. I mean, even at the beginning of the game, well, we'll go back, and I'll kind of analyze it from start to finish. I actually didn't realize this, but I did see some stuff about this game early on, because people were upset about there was a little bit of a social justice element to some of it, and there is, actually. In fairness, there is. When I saw, like, somebody posted a thing, and they were like, oh, when you get in here, it starts off as you start off as a black woman by default, and I remember seeing that, just thinking like, well, okay. And it doesn't really matter. But what is interesting, though, is that when you choose your gender, they explain to you the differences between the gender's roles in society like it matters. It actually doesn't. There is no world impact that I could tell based on the way they set up the gender, which is disappointing. Partly I'm glad that they didn't, because the gender situation they set up didn't make a whole lot of sense, and if they'd gone into depth with it, I think that you would have found... like, if they'd been honest about it, if they'd been serious about it, like, realistic about it, you would have found that society wasn't working very well because of it, possibly. But the game's not really very focused on morality. It's focused more on... I don't know, I never really quite got a sense for what specifically the game's theme was. Because if you walk around, like, trying to be, like, a good guy, you tend to find it doesn't work, because everything is very political and everyone kind of hates you by default. You know, I don't know, it's just weird. So you get to the character selection screen, and you know, you default as a black woman, and it explains to you that only women are allowed to hold property in the land of, land. I can't recall what exactly the greater world is called, but the land of land. And anyway, though, and then it said, like, men are the only ones allowed to own ships. Like, men are the only ones who are allowed to go out to sea, I guess, and it's funny, though, because most of the world is just, like, landlocked. Like, you're just, like, this landlocked continent, and then there's, like, the coasts, and so, like, if you live anywhere but the coast, like, essentially men are just, like, not able to hold land. And I was thinking about that, because I have a theory in my head for why exactly it was that women weren't really allowed to own land very much in the past. And this depends on where you look and, like, what time period you're talking about. But I mean, like, there was a system in place for this whole thing. Like, child mortality was, birth mortality was a thing to think about. Like, women would give birth and then you would die in childbirth, and then you had to resolve the question of, like, who owned, you know, this plot of land or whatever. And it had to go to somebody, so it created these legal complications, and people would fight, you know, if it was to go to her children, then which child, or if she died before having a child, did it go back to the father, or did her husband get to keep it, da, 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 da. So they just made rules, and they said, like, well, you know, women don't officially hold the land. When they marry, the land defaults to their husband. But then, depending on where you look and what time period, you could see, like, for example, if you divorced your wife, then, she would get alimony. Potentially, she might get some of your stuff, and then, back and forth, whatever. So anyway, the point is that the idea is that women didn't necessarily hold land, or they passed that land on to their husbands. They could hold land, but they would pass it on to their husbands when they married, for the reason of, like, child mortality. It just simplified things. In case something terrible happened to you while you were birthing kids, because families were much bigger then. You gave birth to a lot more children, and it was much more likely that you would just die from childbirth. So that's why they did that, and so I was thinking to myself, like, well, all right, so what logical reason would you have to only allow women to hold property? Because, like, it wasn't even like, men can hold property while their wives are, like, if their wife dies, like, it kind of defaults to the man. Like, it didn't even go into that, because then you wouldn't have the gender reversal, really. Like, if the property was like, oh yeah, the woman holds it, but then it defaults to her husband, or her eldest daughter, I guess, I don't know. If it just defaulted to the husband, then you would kind of have essentially a similar system, and it would just be a matter of semantics. It wouldn't really matter. But they didn't. They were just like, yeah, only women. Like, men cannot own property. So I was trying to think of, like, why that would be, and I really didn't come up with any explanations. I can't think of why a society would decide that only women could hold property until, like, you go through, and the overlord who controls the world is named Kyros, and they refer to Kyros almost like a god. Like, they almost always refer to this person as their first name. They're like, Kyros wills this, Kyros demands that, I have come on behalf of Kyros, and Kyros wants this. But when you go and you speak to one of your higher ups, who's like this very powerful, like, he's called the Archon of Justice, and he's like this very powerful, like, supernaturally important man who, like, passes judgments on people. He refers to Kyros by gender, and it turns out Kyros is a woman. So my explanation at this point is just that Kyros is maybe a little bit daft and declared that only women can hold land because she's a woman, and that's why they do that. Otherwise, like I say, it's kind of one of those things, like, when they explain that, when you just open up the screen and they're just like, only women can hold land, it's weird. Like, I don't know why they did that, or why, like, only men could hold ships. Like, I can't even think of a good reason. Like, I mean, like, like, women didn't really go on those long voyages, I guess. I mean, like, ships required a lot of manual labor, and they didn't really want people, I mean, like, you'd be gone for months and months and months, and I think they generally didn't allow women on the ships because they were primarily staffed with men, and then they didn't want to wind up with pregnancies on the ships. And even if you look kind of at history at times when there were occasionally, like, women captains of, for example, pirate vessels. There was one famous couple of women, I think, who manned pirate vessels, and sure enough, during their voyages, they did get pregnant. And, that was just, it was kind of a thing, and so they sort of wanted to avoid that, and that's why they didn't have women on ships. But I don't know that it was legally unacceptable for women to own a ship. I think it was just that they were superstitious about it, and, they just didn't let women on ships because, they didn't want to have to deal with that kind of responsibility of, like, now we have a baby on the boat, what do we do with it? So, yeah. Oh, and of course women were allowed to ride ships, passenger ships. So yes. I don't know. I've never really thought about the legal implications of, like, ship ownership. So I just kind of, like, remembered reading that and thinking, like, oh, that's weird. Like, I wonder how that's going to impact my playthrough of the game. And spoiler alert, it doesn't. It never comes up. It's not important. You never actually really get a sense of how society works with these weird rules in place. It's not a part of the game. I mean, like, it's actually kind of weird. I noticed after I started playing that they do, I mean, like, they put women in the roles of soldiers constantly. Like, you see about equal number of women and equal number of men on the battlefield. And what you really don't see hardly at all is any real domestication. Like, you don't see people putting out clothes, really, or doing much. And I mean, in fairness, you don't really go to the villages in the game. You kind of always go to the city centers to deal with merchants, and you're always dealing with armies. But there are times when I really questioned how people were living in the game, because there are times when you would need people to be working really hard at the domestic aspect of life because things were so harsh, and yet they still had, like, men and women on the battlefield, and there was, like, nobody doing anything. Like, I don't know, maybe they just had, like, they had a chore wheel or something like that they set up, and it was just a big military thing, like everyone in the military shared chores. That's feasible, I suppose. But yeah, I don't know. You just like you don't see clotheslines. You don't see any elements of that of any kind of like domestication. So again, it's just sort of like those roles, those male-female roles, and those jobs, and all that things, all that stuff that you would bring up. The game like hints at it and then reverses the roles that you normally expect based on the way societies worked historically, and then does nothing with it. So it's just weird. So it's unobtrusive, is I guess the bottom line on this. But yes, character creation. And actually, the reason why I bring this up and the reason why I think it's important to note is because a lot of the game is kind of like this, is it feels like there's a lot of lore, and there's a lot of stuff that they have figured out about their world, but unfortunately, you frequently aren't allowed to delve very deep into it, and the more you learn, the more you realize that they haven't given deeper thought to how exactly this worked sometimes. Because this whole like men-women reversal thing is one of the more minor details. What's not minor is at least one of the factions that you have to deal with constantly, because they're just stupid. Like, they're just obnoxiously dumb. And anyway, though, I'll get to that. So the plot of the game is that there's this overlord named Kyros who has taken over the known world, and she is a woman, so she declared that only women can own land, I guess. And she's evil. She's evil, and everyone kind of knows that, and everyone kind of accepts it, but she's all-powerful, so everyone kind of bends to her will. And you are a fate bender, whatever your name is, male or female, it doesn't matter. And your job is to kind of act as a judge. You have this ability to, like, wherever you go, you can arbitrate situations, and your laws, your declarations are binding. As long as people recognize your power, then if you say, like, oh, this person is guilty, then they'll execute them or do whatever. So you get involved in these little arbitrations and scuffles every time you go someplace. But that's an important part of what you do. Is you arbitrate problems, and what you've been sent to do. The other thing that you do is you read what are called edicts, which are these very powerful spells cast by your overlord. You take the edict out somewhere, and then you read it out loud, and then the spell kicks in and just ruins everything for everybody. And that's generally how the edicts work. So what you're set to do is a mix of both. Your god gives you an edict, or your overlord gives you an edict, and they say, go out here, like there's this insurrection that's occurred in this territory that we're trying to hold, and the generals there are complete dumbasses, and they've been bickering and fighting with each other instead of fighting with the enemy. So declare this edict, and the edict says that if you dumbasses don't get your heads together and finish this campaign by such and such a date, then everyone will die. My magic will just kill everyone in this entire region. So, the generals are like, so you go and you meet these two generals, and there's, like I say, there's two factions. There's the disappointing faction and the completely stupid idiot faction. And for a long time, like, I thought this completely stupid idiot faction, like, maybe they were only pretending to be stupid. Like, I was really hoping that they were only pretending to be stupid. But I wound up siding with the disappointing faction and was supremely disappointed by them. I thought, like, okay, so now I'm facing off against the stupid faction. And I'm gonna find out that they've got all these, like, tricks up their sleeve, and they're actually not stupid. But it turns out that no, they are just legitimately stupid. They were only pretending to be smart. What they're kind of depicted as is they're sort of like the one faction called the Disfavored is like this elite military unit. Like, they're very regimented. They're like very Spartan. You know, their whole lives revolve around the military. And then you have this just like gang of disorganized idiots over on the other side. These guys are called the Scarlet Chorus. And the Scarlet Chorus is also full of, like, spy masters and things like that. So, like, whenever you need information, they would take some of their gangs, and they would have them infiltrate the cities and hang around and, like, gather up information or whatever. So I thought, like, okay, they're the spy master gang, so they have this front of being stupid, but deep down they're actually really very cunning. And so I thought for sure that, like, I was going to be constantly dealing with all these, like, spies, and I was going to be, like, running into people who were acting like idiots to make me think they were idiots, and then when I underestimated them, they were going to, like, it was going to spring a trap. And it turns out that, generally speaking, they spring no traps, and they are just honestly stupid. It was like stumbling into, like, every time I dealt with this faction, it was like stumbling into a bunch of kids shoving firecrackers in a frog's ass. And I'd be like, what are you doing? And they'd be like, very important spy work. And then they'd just blow up the frog, and they'd move along. Like, it was like, you know, you're lying. Like, you're lying. Like, that's the whole thing, is you're pretending to be smart. Like, they were actually stupid, but they were pretending to be smart. So, or they were pretending that they were smart by pretending to be, like, I don't know. Let me see, how to put this. They were actually stupid, but they were pretending that they were pretending to be stupid so that I would think that they were smart. They're like, no, we're actually smart people pretending to be stupid. Now watch what happens when this frog explodes. And so it was kind of like, they kind of folded in on themselves where they were just genuinely stupid. Like, when you're stupid people pretending to be smart by pretending to be stupid, by being stupid intentionally, the bottom line is just that you're intentionally stupid. It's like you're failing on purpose so that you don't actually... You're like, well, it didn't really fail if I failed on purpose. If I'm being stupid intentionally, I'm not really dumb. But they were actually just legitimately really dumb. And you find that the Scarlet Chorus is just causing non-stop problems for the disfavored. Like, everywhere you go, like, the Scarlet Chorus has a certain amount of capability. Like, just through sheer numbers, they sometimes overwhelm an area and, like, do something positive, or sometimes they voice, like, a reasonable concern, like, please don't burn all the farmland or whatever. But for the most part, every time I dealt with them, I just found them really frustrating. And eventually, it got to where I didn't want to negotiate with them anymore, because everyone's like a cheeky little piece of crap. And so you come up to them and you're like, what's going on? They're like, what's it to you? And I'm not clear on exactly how they didn't have any, like, structure. So, like, every time you ran into someone, sometimes if you told them to shut up, they'd respect that. And then other times they would fight you. You'd be like, shut up. And they'd be like, oh, that's a fight. And then you'd fight them. And then you'd lose favor with the Scarlet Chorus. And, like, you'd have to fight everyone there because they're all on the same team or whatever. And their boss picked a fight with you. And it's kind of like, you know, how can they get mad at me if they have no organization? Like, if they don't have a head, like, they're just a bunch of idiot gangs all gathered up under a banner, and the banner actually doesn't mean anything, really. How can, like, one... Like, they would have to be so factionalized that if me wiping out a gang should not even get back to the other gangs. Like, they should just be glad that one of their rivals is dead. Like, it really should be that anytime I ran into the Scarlet Chorus, killing them should have no impact on my reputation with the Scarlet Chorus, except for the fact that they're afraid I might show up and kill them too. Like, that should have been the only thing that they worried about. There's no unity here in this entire thing. So the idiot gang, the idiot team, incredibly frustrating. I don't know what would have happened if I'd sided with them, but just throughout the game, I found them incredibly obnoxious, and I found them to not have, like, any redeeming qualities. So, yes, I wound up siding with the disfavored, the disappointing gang, and found that they were incredibly disappointing. Because what they do is they're essentially just afraid to move anywhere they go, because their whole shtick is that they're all connected to each other and they all feel each other's pain, which means that when they go to war, whenever one of them dies, they all feel it, and so they really don't want to go to battle, it seems like. Like, they always talk a big game. They're like, yeah, best soldiers there ever was, always eager for battle, always ready to go, you know, just not anywhere dangerous. And it's like, damn it! You guys, I sided with you, and so you really wind up just doing all the legwork, and it got to a point where, like, there are lots of times where they're willing to go in if you clear the way. Like, if there's, like, a siege, and you're like, okay, let's attack, they're like, well, you go in and you clear out all the pointy bits, like, make sure you take all the swords away and replace them with Nerf pads so none of us get hurt, and that would be kind of your thing, and then you could go back and you'd be like, alright, and cleared out the area. And they'd be like, oh, good, all right, we'll come in. Yay, victory! Oh, yay, we worked so hard. And there were a couple of times when I was able to, like, break the alliance, but I decided not to because, like, the game wasn't giving the the game gives the impression that they're having organizational problems and there's weakness of leadership and whatever. But I don't know how far you were supposed to go with that. Like, I worry about that. Like, when you get into that sort of the game where you're allowed to make moral choices, a lot of times they like to punish you for being immoral. But honestly, like, most people in the game were just kind of dead weight around my neck. And there got to be a point where I stopped worrying about whether or not there were any story implications. Like, I would just show up somewhere. And a lot of times, like, there were frequently times where the game gave you the initiative. Like, there was one that I really liked where, like, this gang jumps out of a portal and they were like, hey, you right there. And one of my options was to just scoop up a rock and peg one of the guys in the head with it without having a negotiation. And I'd been burned by negotiations in this game so mmany times that was, like, the first thing I did. They were just like, hey, you right there. And I just, like, picked up a brick and chucked it in the guy. I was just like, here we go again. And don't even bother talking anymore. Like, and that was really frustrating because I approached the game with the mindset of like, oh, I'm a judge, I'm an arbitrator. And so at first I tried to arbitrate everything, but like communications frequently broke down, and and a lot of times it wasn't like I would just go And I started to get in this mindset, like, after you get past the first part of the game, initially, you can actually get away with communication a lot. Like, the game has a fair number of rewards for being patient and trying to talk your way through things. Like, it changes the flow of the game, but it's important. You know, it's meaningful. And so I was thinking to myself, like, oh, it'll just continue like this. It'll continue to have these sort of elaborate, like, if I do this, then this will happen, and if I talk this out, then this will happen. Like, people who I'd seen earlier had an impact on the game that was, like, a chain. Like, you could capture this guy, and then this would happen, or you could, you know, you would kill this person, and then that would happen. And so there was these meaningful things going on. Like, it actually seemed like it mattered at the first part of the game when you're trapped in this region that's going to be destroyed by your god. But anyway, though, what winds up happening is you personally break the siege. You declare the edict, and then because everyone's a total screw-up and no one can do anything, you have to wind up doing it yourself. So you break the siege, you get in there, you wipe out everybody, and then you break the edict. And this triggers like this huge flow of magic, which then activates this pillar. There's like this giant pillar that's built in this city, and it's super magical, and everyone knows it's really magical, but nobody knows what this pillar does. They've just built their city around it, you know, like centuries ago they did this, and no one can remember why they did this anymore. It's not in recorded history. And there's all these things called the old walls, which are connected to the pillars, and that also go underground and travel across the land, and apparently the entire world. And nobody knows what the old walls do either. I think that I had a quest where I might have learned what the old walls were, but I hit a dead end because I got to the end and there was like this beast woman, and I was trying to talk her into like there was all these hints of all these things, and I run into this beast woman and I was like, hey, do you think you could like come with me? And she's like, no, that sounds awful. And I was like, well, go deeper into the ruins then. And she was like, no, that sounds awful. And I was like, well, stay here. And she's like, oh, that's awful too. And so my only option was like subterfuge, but the skill level was too high because by that point in the game, like I like was not talking to anyone anymore because it was always blowing up in my face, or there was just attack. And so there was like nothing I could offer her, and I didn't have a high enough like lying skill to get her to cooperate. So my other option was just leave, and I was like, all right, I'll just leave you be. And so I just turned around and I walked away from the whole situation. I was like, I'll come back to this. And I never came back to it, so I don't know if there was more that I could learn about the old walls. But the old walls are full of like magical energy and magical monsters and things like that. So you activate this pillar, and then everyone's like, oh god, like, oh, the magical pillar, what does the magical pillar do? And like you're just kind of like, I don't know, but it resonates with me, like it's attuned to me somehow. And so rumors start to go around, and they're talking about stuff, and like I say, this is another thing. The game kind of develops this lore, it's disappointing because it feels like it's building into something, but the game kind of ends abruptly before you really get into what it means for you as a character. But you start to find out that like the Archons, like you start to write letters between like some of the other political parties in the country, and you're like, tell me about the Archons. And you find out that the Archons actually didn't start off, like they originally didn't have their powers. But what they did is they may have had some small latent ability. Like for example, you find out that the general of the disappointing army, initially he just really cared about his soldiers, and he was able to lift them up emotionally, and he was really worried about their wounds and looked after them. And so it was said that he was able to share their burdens and so on and so forth. And gradually over time this evolved in him being able to like literally take on their pain and heal them from wounds just through sheer willpower, to the point where his entire army is connected to him and he always feels their pain. And he's able to protect them from damage, you know, so they're incredibly resilient and all this stuff. And this is kind of how he becomes this Archon. And so there's a lot of implication that the world's opinion of you, like your powers are formed by belief, by people's perception of you. And you know, this seems like fairly meaningful because there's all this faction response to you across the whole world. And I was like trying to cultivate a reasonable, like for everywhere that was held by the Empire, I was trying to cultivate like reasonable response, but it turned out it really didn't matter for a lot of places. Again, like it was just disappointing. It was like, you've gained favor with the such and such area, you've gained favor with this little town, and it was kind of like at the end of the game I didn't even get like an honorable mention for any of that. It was like I mean, like I executed a beast man, and then like because the citizens were angry, and like I tried to negotiate with the beastmen earlier, and I was like, hey, let's talk, and they were like, no, let's fight. And so I killed them all, and then it was like, you've lost reputation with the Red Claw tribe. And I was like, oh well, all right, fine. So I went back to this town and I found this beastman all tied up, and they were like, kill the beastman, and I thought like, well, based on the way this game has gone in the past, I mean, every other time I killed someone who attacked me during negotiation, they held it against me forever. So I may as well just butcher this stupid-ass beast man and gain the favor of the town people. And that is what happened. I gained favor with the town people. I was like, get killed, beast man. And then I, like, failed the quest. And probably, I bet that beast man was how I gained a favorable reputation with the Red Claw tribe or whatever they were. And then maybe they would have talked to me, but I did things out of order, so I didn't get to... Like, again, there's definitely ways that you can negotiate with people, but it feels like you have to do certain things beforehand, or you have to have taken previous actions for you to get those options to unlock. Otherwise, people just by default seem to want to battle you. Like, you can't really seem to get them to surrender. And like I say, this is frustrating because after you conquer this first citadel, then you start to travel around the known world. And the next thing they had me do was go to this this other part of the country that was ravaged by an edict. And this one was the Edict of Storms. So, excuse me. So they were in like perpetual hurricane winds. And what the rule was is that if you killed all the regents of this land, then the storms would end, and you could reoccupy the place. And so the whole place was just a barren wasteland because the winds had been going on for like a year or two or something like that. There was no farmland, there was nothing really to live on, like everything was just completely desolated. And yet the citizens still lived there somehow, like they still went on. And this is where I started to question exactly how this whole thing worked, because it was just like the men and women were all soldiers, like everyone you run into is a soldier. And you don't see, like, any crops. You don't see any clotheslines. You don't see, like, there's no water. There's nothing. Like, they're just living in this totally blasted, desolated plain. And their morale is high. It's, like, through the roof. It's crazy. Like, I can't believe it because like, your troops are on the edge of this storm. Like, that's where they're camped. And they sort of move in and out from there. Like, they go to locations. They march from this safe area into the storms. But these people just live in the storms, like just a constant hurricane winds, like 200-mile-an-hour winds, and they just live there, day to day, and only at a military capacity. So you show up to their various fortifications, and you're like, and I'm just, like, I just call in, and I'm like, hey, I'm trying to end the hurricane, like, if you just surrender, like, we'll round you up as prisoners of war, and we'll call it done. And then they're out there, and they're just like, no, we love our land, we'll fight to the death. And I just like, look around. There's nothing here. It's just hurricane force winds day after day after day. Like, why would you battle me for this piece of garbage land? I don't understand. Like, they had no incentive to battle me whatsoever, and there was no way that they could possibly survive. I mean, like, even with magic, they're explicitly talking about how the magic is so powerful you can't get around it. You can't stop it. And they still they want to live there. And so over and over and over again throughout this entire conquest, I kept coming from like fort to fort to fort, and everyone's morale was sky high. Everyone was super confident. No one was ready to surrender. I kept thinking to myself, like, these people surely must be starving and on the brink of death. Like, surely they're ready to surrender. And the answer was no. The answer was no. They were all well fed. They were all happy to be here, and I wasn't going to pick them up and move them somewhere else. So I just got, like, I wound up just like, every single time I tried to have negotiations broke down, and I had to kill them. And so finally, like, towards the end of this, I was really frustrated, and I ran into, so there's this one place, and it's really badly surrounded by storms, right? It's so badly surrounded by storms that you can't even approach it without being picked up in these, like, super tornado. It's like, I don't know, like it's so bad, it just lifts you up off your feet and throws you, and you're dead. You're dead. And this, like, citadel has been surrounded by these gale force winds for so long. Like, and whenever you read about a siege, you know, you always read about, like, oh, the food will hold out for a matter of months. It's never like a matter of years. But somehow, even though when you break in, there's no crops, there's no food, there's nothing out on the clothesline, like, they don't even, there's no change of clothes, there's nothing there. They've somehow held out in this one, like, tiny little location for, like, this little fortress for I don't even know how long. 3 years, I think it was said. I think that's how long the game said that this has been going on. And so, again, you come to this fortress, and at first I thought, like, oh, okay, so this is where morale is broken. This is the one place where people are not happy to be. Because the first soldiers you run into, they're like, stop right there. And I'm like, hey, leave. Just go. Just leave. Just surrender. And like three soldiers, agree that, yeah, maybe surrender is the better option. I honestly don't care that much about this completely blasted wasteland. So they leave, and I think to myself, like, all right, good. That goes to show that they're demoralized, that they don't want to do this siege anymore, like they're hungry, they're tired. And so I approach the front gate, and everyone's morale is sky high. Everyone is ready to fight to the death. They're like, oh, we'll never surrender. We'll never let go. Like, we'll die for this man right here. And they point to the regent of the land. He's like, last regent of the land. We'll die for him. He's the best. And he gives you this, like, really out-of-touch speech about how he's a patriot and da-da-da-da-da, and you'll never kill patriotism. And it doesn't even sound, like, very compelling. It sounds like this really self-centered speech, like, about I am important, and I will do this, and I am this, and I am that. And I just can't fathom how, like, 3 years of being trapped inside the eye of a tornado could possibly, like, give you loyalty to this man. Like, it was just you and him. Like, there's like 30 people in this place, and it's like, how could they not have killed him already? How did they still have loyalty to him? I just don't understand. And so I'm like, all right, surrender, and I won't have to butcher everyone, and the storms will end. Like, this is so much a win-win scenario. Like, I can't understand, like, how could your spirit not be broken by now? And the game just goes, no, our spirit's not broken. It's not broken. It's not broken at all. So they just close the gates, and then they're like, continue the siege. And at this point, like, I was just like mad. Like, I was frustrated with the game because I could not believe that none of these people were demoralized enough to be open to surrender. Like, they should have been able to discuss, negotiate. Like, so you have to storm in the place. Like, you get your wizards to knock down the walls, and you break in through the front door, and you kill the regent. And at the time, they tell you were supposed to be looking for the daughter of the commander. The Ash's daughter. The commander's named Ash. You're supposed to be looking for his daughter. Her name is Amelia. And you find her, and it turns out that she actually willingly defected to the enemy, and then has been living in this stupid castle for 3 years, and recently she had a baby, and guess what? It's the heir to the regency. So you kill the regent, and the Storm of Edicts does not end because all the regents are still alive, because one of your team's commanders defected to the enemy and then had their kid. And it doesn't even sound like she was, like, captured. It sounds like she just fell in love and then willingly defected and then stayed in this, like, ruined castle for 3 years. And she's still, like, proud of the whole thing. And it's just, like, I was just so mad because they were like, now you have to kill a baby. Or you could find another way around it. And I was so frustrated with how things had gone with this whole campaign that I really just wanted to kill the baby. Like, I honestly didn't want to go back and talk to Ash about his daughter and this baby she had had. Like, I am the judge, right? Like, I'm the fate binder. It's my job to come to these kind of situations and make decrees and decisions. And I decree that treason is treason, and I will kill your baby. But I was wary of it because it's a video game. And you know how, like, when you play a video game, you know, if you make the morally wrong decision, it looms over your head. You get punished for it. I was concerned about it. So I went to go talk to the dad, and he was like, I just killed them both. Like, he's like, I'm so embarrassed. I'm so angry. I'm so furious. And I was like, you and me both, buddy. Like, you and me both. How are these people even alive? How are these people? How are they? Why didn't they surrender the minute I showed up at their gate? Like, we wouldn't have had to deal with this. I mean, like, if I weren't so pissed at them, I wouldn't have even considered killing the baby. We would have, and this is the thing, like, the game gives the NPCs a lot of power over you, the player, and I really dislike this, actually. Especially because you're considered like an arbitrator, like, you're supposed to be making decisions. But, like, I told Amelia, I'm like, give me the baby, and she goes, no. She's there by herself. Like, mind you, I've killed everyone in this place, and the place is still surrounded by horrible, like, hurricane force winds. And I say to her, like, you and the baby come with me. You're prisoners of war. I'd like you to come. Like, we'll take you back to camp, and we'll discuss what to do. And she just goes, no. And so, like, then the game is like, well, my options are to kill Amelia and the baby right now. Or I have to, like, just leave her in this, like, wind-blasted castle and go find a way around her being a frickin' bitch. And so, Like that was the thing that was frustrating. It was like, we can't just subdue her. Like, we can't just like put her in shackles. Like, why is everyone's morale so high? How is everyone still able to resist? I mean, like, clearly it got them nowhere. It got them nothing. They gained nothing from it. I don't get it. So she just like, no. And so she stays. And so I had to leave, and I was just like, I put someone to guard her while she was in the castle. I was like, all right, like, we'll guard you from here. I'll see you in a few days. And so I had to like travel around and find these legal records. And then it turned out that all she had to do was just announce that her baby was no longer the regent. And you know what's really annoying? She wasn't even announcing it to anyone except for me. Because everyone that she was regent to was dead. I killed them all. Because every time I went somewhere and asked for a surrender, they told me to shove it up my ass. So I get there and I'm like, yes, you are the last two citizens of your nation. If you just declare that you're no longer in charge of the two of you, then I guess there's nothing but symbolic importance here, and basically everyone's dead. So just declare that your child's not the regent of you, and you're fine. And she was like, oh, is that all? Okay, I declare my baby's not the regent. And the storms ended. And she's just, geez. Like, I don't know. A part of me still regrets sparing the baby because it was so dumb. And like, her father, like, this was the other thing, was that her dad, Ash, then thanked me for that. And like, I gained favor for not killing her with him, and that was important. Like, it turns out that the whole favor system, there's only like 3 factions that matter as far as the favor system goes, and it's all the ones that are related to you personally. Every other faction plays, as far as I can tell, 0 role. They might, I mean, maybe if I had gained favor with them, they might have had some sort of importance, but from what I played, there was no significance whatsoever to the favor system, except for with Ash, the idiot team, and with your boss, Tuna on the Archon of Judgment. So, yes, that was a bit of a fiasco, and that left me just like emotionally exhausted. But fortunately, the next thing they sent me off to do was to go deal with like this country that was just completely on fire. Like, the whole country was just on fire, and I found that really hilarious. Like, they're just like, all right, so our next land of conquest is just on fire. And this was the thing, is like, by this point, like, as you go from like place to place and you see the devastation, you start to really get a sense for the fact that your boss, your Lord Kyros, is really just in conquest for the sake of conquest, and they don't really care what happens to any of the lands. Because everywhere you go, it's kind of like, well, this is ruined, and this is ruined, and this will never grow crops again, and this is just terrible. So, yeah, so you go to like the land of fire, and mostly it's just like these sages. And that one was funny because like the sages were mostly cooperative, which was just a breath of fresh air. I got down there and I was like, hey, I'm gonna take your knowledge and keep it for myself. Is that cool? And they were like, as long as you're preserving it, buddy, that's fine. And I was like, all right, get out of here. And I didn't like take any prisoners of war because I didn't have a military behind me. There was just a bunch of like, the idiot gang was in charge of this area. And this was funny because by this point of the game, I was so sick of negotiating with people and having it all blow up in my face that the idiot gang, like, I walked up to the front door of this library and they were like, hey, you're not allowed in here. You gotta go talk to the boss first. He's over there. And I was one of those things where I just picked up a brick and I like bashed the guy's head in, and I was like, come on, let's keep going. I was like, I'm so sick of talking to people who just gonna throw crap back in my face. And maybe I was wrong about that because the idiot gang, maybe they were up for negotiations. But like I say, by that point I'd gathered the opinion of them that they were essentially pretending to be stupid, because if they were pretending to be stupid, then they're not actually stupid, but they were actually stupid. And, you know, through my entire time in the library, you know, you ran into members of their gang, and you could talk to them, and the fact that they were stupid meant that it was easy to just confuse them. Like, there were multiple times where I ran into gangs, and I was like, oh, you should check over there, and they would just, like, leave. You know, like, they were just like, oh, it's the Fate Binder, like, what do you want us to do, boss? And I was just like, I want you to leave. And they'd be like, okay. And they'd, like, go. And so, yeah, just stupid, disorganized, like, no respect for anything. It didn't matter. Like, I was just like, God. Like, so far not regretting ignoring these guys. Like, so far I'm glad I snubbed these guys, because they have no value whatsoever to, like, a real... Like, they're just a bunch of rabble. Like, they don't really have any ability to found anything. Like, they have no control of anything. They're not really building a nation. They're just idiots. So yeah, so, like, I was just like, screw off, you idiots. And then some of them were like, no, I'll never screw off, and I just had to kill them. But, yeah, that... I don't know. Just kept going. Just kept going. So at one point though, like there was, I think I missed where a bunch of the sages must have been, because at one point I get to this I get to the big chamber where they're keeping like the scroll of ultimate secrets, and it's got all these it's got all this information in it, all this magical information, and I walk up to it, and my options were like examine the scroll, throw the scroll in the lava, or just take the scroll. And like I was kind of looking at it, and I was like, it can't be that easy, can it? Like, the edict said that the library had to be destroyed, and then they used the scroll to stop the library from being destroyed. So if I just take the scroll of infinite knowledge and just run out the door with it, technically the library will be destroyed and everything will be fine. But what the sages were trying to do is they were trying to protect the scroll of infinite knowledge. So I didn't understand why their first instinct was not to run away with the knowledge and hide it somewhere. Like, so I don't know, they just kept it locked in this. So I was like, huh. So I just took the scroll and I ran out the building with it, it burned down the library, and then the edict ended. And I was just like, oh, well, I have the scroll of infinite knowledge now. I don't understand why no one thought to do this. Weird, very weird. I would have thought first thing they would do was move the scroll to where the enemy didn't know where it was. But okay, yeah. But then I get like lost all sorts of favor with the sages, which was funny because like prior to that I had reasonably good favor with them. Like, but I think that what happened was they must have been a bunch of sages in another room I didn't know about. And when the library burned down, I think they burned down with it. So I was just like, oh. Like, I don't know why they're mad at me for that. I did save everyone I ran into, like, circumstances being what they were. I wasn't actively trying to ruin the sages, but they're pissed at me. Like, I saved all the knowledge, too. That was the thing, is I should have gotten points for, like, saving all the knowledge. And I wasn't even, like, preventing them from having it. I explicitly gave the scroll to Lantry, who was part of their guild. I was just like, here, Lantry, hang on to this. Like, he should have been able to write a letter being like, hey, guys, scroll's safe and sound. I've got it. I'm keeping it under wraps. I'm going to make copies, and I'm going to send them out to everyone. And I wouldn't have stopped him. Like, I wouldn't have stopped the spread of that knowledge. I think it was illegal for me to let him do that, but by that point, I'd broken enough laws that I was just like, sure, whatever. Like, I don't care. But they were still mad at me, and so just, yeah, whatever, whatever. But by that point, I was used to the game doing that to me, where it was just like, oh, something kind of out of your control caused you to lose this favor, and it was like, forget it. Who cares? So, yes. Then you have to go to, like, the land of rock. The land of earthquakes. And the land of earthquakes was funny because, like, you got there and the disappointing faction are like, all right, so we've got this plan. We're supposed to kill the Archon of Stone, who was buried here by the edict a long time ago. And when he dies, the edict will end. But we think that we can kill him in such a way that it causes the entire land to essentially go fallow forever. No one will ever be able to plant crops in here ever again. And the chorus has kind of set up their base camp over there on the corner of this land. So if we make this land ruined, they'll lose all the crops they have. And so, like, you're allowed to raise your hand and be like, I have reservations about this plan because we're, conquering this land. And if we make the entire place fallow, we have no reason to conquer this. Then it's just as bad as the land that was on fire and the land that was in constant hurricanes. They're both worthless to us, really. We're just holding empty ground. We're holding, like, wasteland right now. Like, so far we have 3 giant wastelands. Like, do we really want to make another wasteland? Is this really a good idea? And so you voiced that opinion, and then, like, pretty quickly they were like, opinion overruled. And then they just, like, proceeded with their plan. And there was never, like, I thought that maybe the game was going to give me a chance to sort of, like, I don't know, surreptitiously not make things work. Like, the chorus showed up and they, like, messed with the ritual, and they were like, oh no, if the ritual doesn't get fixed in time, then the Archon will just die and the whole land won't be ruined. Like, we'll be able to plant crops and sustain ourselves here. And I thought that I was going to be able to, like, oh, I'll go take care of it. And I'd be able to run off to where they disrupted the thing and just, like, I don't know, pick my toes until the ritual went off incorrectly and then the Archon died and the land didn't get ruined. But no, to advance the story, I had to go and I had to complete the ritual. I had to help them do it correctly. And then the whole land was ruined. And that was, like, part of the thing, is it was, at the end, it was like, yeah, this land became worthless to everyone, like, and you holding it was meaningless and stupid. And so I was just like, I specifically objected to this, but, oh, I was given the option to go to the main commander and talk to him about it, and he was like, what do you think we should do this? And I had the no option, but the reasons I was given to say no were not, like, it wasn't the sensible, obvious option. Like, I was looking for, no, because we're trying to conquer the land. And like, you know, people pay us taxes in the form of grain, and we use grain to feed our armies. So if we don't have grain, we can't build armies. Therefore, no, don't make the land permanently fallow. I didn't have that as an option. What I had was like, well, I don't know, breaking the edicts is maybe against Kuros's will. But I'd already broken like 3 edicts, so there was no, like, it would have just been hypocritical for me to say that. And then the other one was like, no, I'm opposed to it on moral grounds. The Archon was so great. And like, that was also like, it wasn't really why I was opposing it. I was opposing it for the incredibly sensible and logical reason that a warlord should not devastate the lands that he conquers, because otherwise, why did he bother conquering them? If you gain nothing, why did you throw soldiers away? So like, somehow you don't get this option. Like, this is from a man who feels the pain of each and every soldier. Every time someone dies, he feels it. And you can't just say to him, like, why did you kill so many soldiers just to ruin the land? Like, that doesn't appeal to him somehow. So you can't bring that up. So I was just like, yeah, I guess we should do it because this is the most logical reason from the list of choices I was given. You know, it was like the closest thing to my opinion was yes, we should because this reason. And it wasn't really my opinion. I didn't really want to do this thing. But it was like the option, that was the closest option to my opinion, was yes, but. Like, I was able to say, like, yes, but there's a caveat here, or yes, but I kind of disapprove, I think is what I was able to say. So, I don't know, maybe if I'd said, like, no, I oppose it on moral grounds, we could have worked it out, but what I really should have been able to say was, no, let's find a way to do this that doesn't decimate, like, the food, okay? Oh, no, now I remember what it was. It was no, I'm concerned that the spells won't do enough damage. I think that's what I was saying. Yeah, that was it. I had no because Kuros might get angry, even though I'd already broken 3 edicts, which is hypocritical and stupid. Or I could say no because I'm afraid the spell won't do enough damage. Which, you know, the logical response would be to that, like, oh, well, I'll contact the wizards and I'll make sure they amp up the killing power of the spell so that it definitely wipes out the area. And I'd be like, oh, thanks, you've assuaged my fears. Like, so I just went with, like, yes, we should do it, but let's do it cautiously. I think that was what I was able to say. That was, like, the closest I got to what I really felt. And, yeah. So, I annihilated this land for no reason. I don't even know what kind of role it played, because we didn't even, we attacked in a couple of days, and I mean, like, I'm sure that the chorus must have had some provisions. Maybe they didn't. I mean, they were disorganized and stupid. But like, it's not like grains are instantly harvested. I mean, there must have been food stockpiles, and they must have had, like, a while. But, like, the whole thing came to a head, like, a few days later. So making the entire land fallow was just stupid. Like, there was no benefit to doing it, and I was mad that I had to do it. So, yes, yeah, I was just sort of like, great, good, glad we did that. Glad I didn't get to have a sensible objection to that one. I'm glad I wasn't given the option to tell the people in charge that they are idiots. So, yeah. I even tried to find a truce with the chorus on that one. Like, I found some of their soldiers, and I was like, hey, we can work together on this. Like, I actually don't want to do that. And they were like, oh, shove it up your ass, dickhole. You've been fighting us all this time. And I was like, no, we have mutually, like, we agree on something at this point. I'd like to work with you. And they were like, no, battle. So again, I should have just picked up a rock and thrown it at them. And pretty soon, like I say, that got to be the option I always took every time I ran into people. Because almost by default, it seemed like most of the time, I was just punished for trying to talk it out, because it was just like, oh, you lose favor and they're angry. As opposed to if you threw a brick, then, you know, they'd just be angry. Like, I don't know. It didn't seem to make a difference. So, yes. And then finally you get to the end of the game, and it turns out that you gather up all these pillars. You control all these pillars. And then the chorus attacks your stronghold. And you go up to the top of one of your pillars, and you're able to actually cast an edict. And so then the Overlord declares that, like, everyone has to fight for control of the land. So the Overlord likes their infighting. And the game kind of just wraps up. Like, that's it. You go and you either submit the Archons or you kill them. And then the game's kind of over. Oh, but there was one more thing that I thought was really funny, is there's this Archon of Execution. This has been dragging on a little bit, but yeah, there's this Archon of Execution. And at first I thought he had a mustache. And so when I was talking to him, I was seeing, like, an old guy. It looked like a Lou Pickles mustache. And so I thought I was, like, talking to, like, Lou Pickles, but he's covered in, like, face paint, and he's all like, I'm the Archon of Shadows. What's going on, kid? And it turns out that he actually didn't have a mustache. What it was is he had face paint that looked like a mustache. And so he's actually kind of a dork, if you think about it. Like, when he's a young guy, he's kind of a dork. But when I thought he was like Lou Pickles, I kind of respected him, because I was like, oh yeah, he's like this really old guy who's been killing people longer than I've been alive. Like, that's cool. And he probably is still like this really old guy who's been killing people longer than I've been alive. But he just didn't have that sort of venerable feel when I realized he really wasn't like I thought he had a gray mustache. Like, I thought he was actually really old. Like, I thought that he was like this slightly just out of shape little old man who was standing around just being like, hey kid, like, how's it going? And I was like, hey Lou Pickles, like, man, how's it going with you? And he's like, I'm gonna kill you one day. And I'd be like, oh Lou, buddy, I'll see you when you stab me in the back. Or I won't, I guess, if you're fast enough. So anyway, though, so Lou Pickles, when the Overlord declared that we all had to fight amongst ourselves, Lou Pickles sent me a message, and he was like, hey, just want to let you know that when I kill you, it's not because I want to, but I am going to. And so, like, I sent him a message back, and I was like, hey, if you're convinced that you're going to kill me anyway, why don't we just meet in this clearing, and we'll fight to the death? And he was like, all right, come alone. And so, like, throughout the game, you get these, like, notifications that he's been watching you. He's, like, the guy of subterfuge or whatever. And as long as you're being cunning, he likes you. So I thought to myself that it would be insulting to him if I actually showed up alone. So I showed up with all my friends. And then we all stood in a circle, and we pushed him on the ground, and we kicked him until he died. So we just, like, kicked him to death on the ground. We were like, eat shit, Lou Pickles! Oh, you'll never take us! So, Lou Pickles died. He perished beneath the mighty blows of our heels. And it was funny, though, because when I went to go talk to Tunan, who was in charge of Lou Pickles, he was, like, really upset about it. He was like, you had no right to kill him. Like, why did you kill him? And I was like, well, he sent me a letter saying he was gonna do it. And so I got judgment from Tunan. Like, he put me through a trial, and I'd done my best to actually follow the laws and do things the way that the way that I was under the impression I was supposed to do things. And so, like, he found me innocent at the end of all that. He's like, I find you innocent of charges. And he's like, well, in that case, I submit to you. Because he didn't want to battle with me. It was like the Kyros had declared that we either had to fight to the death or submit. And being the Archon of Justice, he couldn't kill me if he couldn't justify it, so he just agreed to submit to me. And since he was in charge of the Archon of Shadows or whatever, it turned out there really was no reason for me to kill him. If I'd let him live, everything would have been fine. So it was really kind of funny at the end of that. I was like, oh, well, I guess I didn't need to lure Pickles out to an empty field and then kick his head in. Oh, well, I guess, you know, lesson learned. I'm so used to everyone just not being cooperative, I really didn't think that you, Tunan, of all people, I mean the Archon of Justice, I just assumed that you were going to be able to justify anything you did in your head. It didn't matter. I was also surprised, too. I went to go talk to Ash, and I was really shocked by the fact that he was willing to submit to me. I was like, hey, Ash, like, why don't you submit to me? And he was like, you know what, you've been so great, I guess I will. And I was just like, oh, seriously? I think this is the first successful negotiation I've had in, 4 territories. Great. Glad that panned out for me. He was like one of the only people who I had high favor with because he was cooperating with me in the first place. And the courts also had a high opinion of me. Like, it turned out that the people that I'd come there with, like the people who were on my side from the first part of the game, never switched from my side. Like, they would continue to be on my side throughout the entire game. And they were the only ones who were cooperative with me at the end of the game. I was just like, all right, like, I've stayed loyal to the people who were loyal to me initially. I never stabbed you guys in the back, so... like, what do you want to do? And they were like, well, I see no reason to fight. And I was like, all right, good. Great. And so that was it. I don't know, it just cracked me up that, like, I arrived there, and Kyros' people were the ones I was friends with at the beginning, and at the end, Kyros' people were the ones I was friends with. And it was, I feel like that must have been the easiest path, too, because they start off amicable towards you, and not trying to jerk your chain. I mean, like, the Scarlet Chorus is constantly trying to mess with you, but Ash's Legion, the disfavored, they never really are trying to mess with you. They're always straightforward and always honest with you, and they're cooperative and they're organized, and they know what they're doing, and they know what they want you to do, and you all work together, and it's fine, and everything gets moving. And Tunan is the same way. He's organized, he knows what his relationship is with you, he trusts you, he tells you what to do, I report back to him. He was my boss originally. I would just tell him what was going on. He was asking me how things were going in the war effort. I would tell him. Like, I developed a fine relationship with him, and then at the end of the game, it was like, all right, decide what you want to do. And I was like, well, these two guys seem all right, so, you know, I'm not going to kill them. And so then at the end of the game, it was like, yeah, it turns out those guys were loyal to you, and they helped out a lot, and da-da-da-da-da, and I don't know. So, Tyranny. I recommend it, like I say, but on sale. I think that the game has faults, It's weird. It has like some lore that feels like it's going to go somewhere, but then it kind of doesn't. It feels like it's got some twists and turns that are going to go places, and then they don't. There's like it feels like, I mean, maybe this varies from playthrough to playthrough. I kind of rushed through it because I thought that there was a matter of time when there really wasn't a matter of time. Like the favor system was frequently pointless. It didn't matter. Oh, and also they have a lot of abilities that were like per rest, which were frustrating. This is a very D&D sort of thing. But you would get these like mystical items, and they'd be like, oh, it's a legendary item. And I thought like, oh, that's really important, these legendary items. But it turns out that they're really not that big of a deal, because you get this power, and it's like once per rest, you can attack enemies with this attack. And they're fairly powerful attacks, but the trouble is that like you have to rest after you use them if you want to use them again. And it's not too inhibitive because time doesn't matter and you can rest whenever you want. But I really didn't like that because, you know, you use that power once, then you have to rest. And like, I never was short on campfires really. But it seems like a kind of a awkward restriction that made the legendary weapons kind of awkward. And there was a sword that I had that had like this Gravelight spell cast on it. It was a Gravelight enchantment. And what that sword did is whenever when I hit people with it, it would just absorb health from them. And I found that that sword was actually significantly more useful than a sword that had a like once daily ability to hit everyone in a line or whatever. It's kind of like, like why is this so legendary? I don't understand. The Gravelight sword is by far more useful. Like it keeps me sustained in the battle for longer. And there's no functional reason for me to want to, I don't know, like switch over to a weapon it has a lower DPS even. That was like one of the things I had to like upgrade it a bunch. And it was there like the legendary weapons are more expensive to upgrade. So they like, or I think they are anyway. I might be wrong about that, but I feel like they are. I don't know. It's just weird. Like there's just lots of things. Like there's a lot of potential in the game and it's fun. Like, it's actually fun. It's an enjoyable game. But it doesn't fully live up to all the potential that it creates. It's unfortunate. Like, they concluded it gracefully. Like, but it feels like there was a lot of ambition there. Like, there's a lot of strong foundation being built around the game. But then they weren't able to properly exploit all that powerful foundation that they built up. So you kind of wind up like with this iceberg, and you just get to interact with the very tip of the iceberg. And there was like all this stuff that I was kind of like looking at it, and I'm just like, man, like, how deep was this supposed to go? I don't know. It looks like there was supposed to be a lot here, and I'm only allowed to see what's here at the top. So, I don't know. That was kind of a letdown, but it's a positive sort of letdown, because when you look at a game and you say, like, man, it felt like there was so much more depth here. It's a sign that it was a well-planned game, and there was engagement there that you can enjoy. Like, definitely there's engagement, but man, I really would have liked to see more of that, of the lore. I would have liked to see maybe more of like the personal life of things. Like I say, just establishing something weird like only women can hold land. It's just such an odd thing to say and then do nothing with. Like, I don't get why they would do that. And I mean, like, occasionally my gender came up, but mostly just to belittle me for my gender. That was kind of the weird thing, was that like women were in charge of the beastmen. Like, only females could be in charge. They're kind of like hyenas, I guess. And so like a female beastman showed up, and she was like, "Oh, you're an alpha, except you're a man." And she was like appalled by that. And I was just like, like I don't, like I don't know, whatever. Like, you've been enslaved constantly, so I don't like it, like they were familiar with people. I don't know why she was like so put off by the fact that I was a man. I was just like, "Oh, but you're a man," and I was like, yeah, that happens. I'm sorry. Sometimes we have penises, and yeah. Just weird. It's like, yeah, oh, but you're a man. Like, you're like the physically stronger of your gender and of your race. Somehow you're the stronger than I don't know. Whatever game. Like, I guess, yeah, fine. This is like one of the few times my gender came up. I don't. It's just weird. Weird that they kind of did that and it did nothing with it. But anyway, though, I suppose I rambled on about this game for long enough. So that'll be it for today. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I'll catch you all next time.